Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Jim Stroud podcast. Today we have a very special guest. Special guest, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Hanna Hasl-Kelchner, and I am the author of the multi-award winning book, Seeking Fairness at Work, Cracking the New Code to Greater Employee Engagement, Retention, and Satisfaction. So basically, I tell truth to power. Basically, I tell management what the employees secretly want to hear, but are afraid to say, but what they need to hear. So anyhow, that's my story, and looking forward to our conversation.
Okay. Now I know you have you're credited with these unwritten rules of the workplace. Can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, sure. Basically, we all start a new job with great expectations, right? We're excited. It looks like it's a great opportunity. And then we get there, never more excited than on our first day of work, right? Maybe a little nervous because we don't want to step on toes or anything. See,
Mm,
that's the whole thing, the toe stepping part. It's like the unwritten rules. How do we know how to navigate this? And so you're always on high alert, right? The radar is up. And then you learn slowly how things really work. It's not quite what it was in the interview, but you stick it out. And the thing is that they seem to fall into a handful of categories. That's what my research showed. Um, one of them is recognition. Sometimes people they don't even know your name. Walk by you like you're invisible. You
yeah.
want to ask a question and then you're afraid to because, oh no, now I'm going to sound stupid. When in reality, it's something important you really need to know in order to do your job. But somebody's unavailable. They're just pushing you off. They're not paying attention when you do talk to them. So, recognition and accessibility are two things that are really important and that can really throw you off your game if you feel that what I do doesn't really matter. I'm just a cog machine. Okay, then I'm going to do that much and I'm not going to raise my hand or stick my neck out because it's not worth it. So,
Hmm.
that's just one. And, there's a handful of others. Conflict management, you know, um, some
Well,
managers
actually,
just, yeah.
actually, let me piggyback on that because that first point was really interesting too. It makes me wonder whose responsibility is it the most to communicate? Is it that the worker should come out of their shell, or is it that the manager should know how to talk to that particular employee? Which is
That's a really good question. And I would lean towards manager having to take the lead because
okay.
really their role is leadership. And so if somebody, for example, you've had an employee for a while and all of a sudden they're quiet. They're not really volunteering. They're doing their job, doing a great job, right? The tasks are being completed and they're being completed well and on time, but they're not really speaking up. I do think it's incumbent on the manager to say, Jim, I noticed that you used to participate a lot in our meetings, but you know, you haven't been speaking up much. What's happening? I noticed that, is there a reason? And to give you a chance to explain, well, Susie over here, the minute I say something, she jumps in and cuts me off. Okay, we got a communication dynamic issue going on here. Or it doesn't seem to matter what I say. The decision's already been made. I mean, there could be lots of reasons. Or maybe you're preoccupied with something that happened outside of work. Okay. My kids are having a tough time in school. I'm going through a divorce. My house is being renovated and it's just total chaos. Just, there could be a lot of good reasons that have nothing to do with work that, you just can't leave it all behind. So, you're a part of a package deal. So I do think it's important for managers, just like a coach on a sports team. If a player isn't performing as well as you know they can, then why wouldn't you say, hey, what can we do to improve your game? How can I help you? What do you need? Um, I mean, maybe the player will come forward. Maybe they're afraid to come forward for one reason or another because they saw how someone else got treated. I do think that it is the manager's responsibility because they need the cooperation of their employees to get the work done. So why wouldn't they want to expand their influence by building that relationship and strengthening it instead of sitting back and saying, "Oh yeah, Okay, you got a problem? Come talk to me. No, that's not going to get you as far.
I'm sensing a double-edged sword there because I know some managers will have this mindset of, well, I'll just treat everybody the same. No, there's no favoritism. Everyone gets the same level of managerial care. But is that really fair if somebody takes instruction differently than the other person? You know what I mean? It's like with parenting, like you love all your children the same, but you have to treat each one a little different sometimes. Does that apply in the workplace too, you think?
Well, the thing about one size fits all,
Yeah.
um, it it's not the most effective, and it's so interesting that you point that out because I saw a little clip about believe it or not, a kindergarten teacher who was trying to make that very point with her class. And so she called on somebody who was fairly tall for their age, asked them to come up to the
Mm,
blackboard and, write something at the very top. Okay, they did. Okay. And then she picked on somebody who was much shorter and said, okay, I want you to write something right underneath it. Well, of course they couldn't quite reach. Well, do you need a step stool? Yeah. Okay. Now, is it fair for that person to have a step stool so that they could do their job and reach underneath there?
ooh,
And the whole
ooh,
class understood that concept, you know?
okay,
And so I don't see that necessarily as favoritism as much as being able to help them succeed.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Do you think that although someone may understand what you just explained at a uh, mental level, a cognitive level, but they still feel a little bit of resentment maybe because they think, okay, this manager is really going out of their way to make sure this person feels included. I don't feel that they're going out of their way to make me feel included because I'm not that tall or I don't have whatever shortcoming or issue. Do you see doing those kind of things building resentment in workers, or is that, and if so, is that really the manager's fault, or should the manager really be concerned about all that?
Oh, wow, Jim, you got a whole lot packed in there. You good for you.
I'm going to do some. This is a therapy session because I've
A
had some.
therapy session.
I've been in some
Um,
situations.
Well, it's interesting because I think it really comes down, in my experience, to the relationship between that manager and the employee.
Okay.
Okay. There are those situations, and you may have relationships like that where you can, somebody could walk in and say, Jim, I got to talk to you. I got an issue here. I'm seeing this, it doesn't feel fair to me, you know?
Mm,
um, because I want this, I want that. And then, you might be able to explain, well, I didn't see it that way. Now that you raised it, I could do this. Would that help? I could do that. Would that help? But if you don't have the relationship where coming to you isn't going to get blowback to me, where it's like, excuse me, but no, and I don't have time for this right now. Yeah, the resentment is going to go through the roof, So I think it's about having the relationship where there's enough goodwill built, where you're willing to hear, the manager is willing to hear, maybe something that unexpected, but their open door policy is truly open door, where they're willing to listen, where they're willing to ask questions. Well, I'm not sure how or why you're feeling resentment. Help me understand your perspective. Doesn't mean you're going to agree with them, but understanding where there's been that fork in the road can help you maybe bring things back together again. So I do think it's a management responsibility. Who knows how it started? Whether somebody is very sensitive and just because of their background, everything is just, like, oh, boom, that means that. Well, maybe that meant that over here, but it doesn't necessarily mean that over here. So let's clarify. Let's get that misunderstanding taken care of before it blows up into something that we can't get over. And then we have to part ways, which maybe you don't even want to do because they're a good performer.
yeah. Yeah. That also makes me think of something I've seen recently on the TikToks of the world, where
Oh,
these workers of a certain age are saying they're complaining about working 40 hours a week, that they don't have time to do fun stuff because they're always working. And they have a good job, good benefits, presumably, making decent salary, but they still feel like it's unfair to work as much as they do, or feel like they have to pay the bills that they create. How does a manager deal with that with a certain generation? I don't want to blanket everybody in this generation, but let's just say these kids today, they don't know. They're complaining when they're not on my lawn, they're complaining about working too much. I guess I'm trying to figure out how much is the manager's responsibility in dealing with that, and how much of that is the worker's responsibility. Like, where does accountability come into play there? Like, if I'm the manager, should I have to listen to this? I should say, yeah, go talk to mommy and dad. Don't talk to me about it.
Well, it's about managing expectations and what's
Yeah.
realistic. Um, and I can understand why somebody, especially somebody who is relatively new to the workforce and had a lot of free time before, and maybe did well in school, so they didn't have to study much and had more discretionary time to do whatever they want, is suddenly feeling uh, a time squeeze. And it's so interesting that you mentioned that, because my granddaughter is actually going to be a freshman at one of the local universities here, and
Mm.
my husband went to one of their orientation sessions, and it was so funny because the dean actually went up there and he said, if you're going to spend 2 hours on TikTok, you're not going to make it. You need to you need to be disciplined about
Yeah.
managing your time.
Hmm.
You need to spend enough time sleeping, because you do need, a good 8 to 10 hours at your age. That's important. And if you spend all your time on TikTok and class, then you're not going to have time to do your work. So, I think part of that is a little bit of growing up and recognizing that you can't do everything that you want at the same time, and setting your priorities. If you want to spend that much time on social media or having fun, great. This is the trade-off. There's always trade-offs in everything we do in life. And so be honest with yourself about what's important. And if you want all those nice benefits and the salary and the prestige that comes with a good job that you have, then these are the trade-offs. Find another job that gives you more free time. That's out there too, you know? But this particular gig, this is the deal, right? And so, I think people just need to be realistic about what the trade-offs are. Now, if their job calls for a lot of overtime or travel that does squeeze out weekends and evenings and things like that, that's another story. But if they're doing 8 hours and still complaining, well, that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, yeah. One word I hear a lot in this generation, the word fairness. It isn't fair. And it makes me wonder, if a company was going to audit fairness in their organization, where would they start? How could they do it? Especially if you're in a multi-generational workplace, which is, more and more the norm nowadays.
Well, that is really a very involved question.
Mm.
Fairness in my book, literally my book, um,
Available at Amazon.com.
uh, is about it's about the social contract.
Hmm.
And I understand that some employers don't get that. They treat it more like a transaction. You're hired, I'm buying your time, which they are. Okay.
Yeah.
And so you're going to do what you're told, end of discussion. And that's really only part of the story, because, yeah, you have responsibilities and job requirements. Everybody does when they're working. That's not a surprise. Uh, but what's key to the fairness, my experience, is the relationship. You talked a little bit before about, if somebody comes to you and says something is unfair, and that in a way is the nub about uh, that social contract, which is about honesty and fair dealing. In other words, being supportive. And that there's a whole slew of things about what it takes to be supportive of somebody, so that they can succeed. The information that they need. Are there clear expectations about what the requirements are? What does success look like? Uh, what does advancement look like? What skills are necessary? Do you have access to the information? Are the goals reasonable? Can they be achieved? Sometimes a stretch goal is fine, but sometimes people set up these goals that are literally impossible. So you're being set up to fail. Now, who likes that? Nobody, nobody, right? And so I think it starts with, if you're going to do some kind of an audit, about that social contract and our managers and leaders being honest, and are they dealing fairly? And so the fairness part goes into these unwritten rules about things that are part of the culture that get baked in, that because somebody's been there for a while, they don't even realize that those things are counterproductive because, well, that's the way we do it. And so, taking a cold look at that. And even the employee surveys that get done, satisfaction surveys, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. What are you doing with those results? You throwing them out because, oh no, that can't be right. And hand it to HR, let them do it. That's like me saying I want to lose 10 pounds, but Jim, can you? Because I like my dessert. You know, I mean, there are some things that can't be delegated. And so recognizing that employees, when they pull back because they feel they're being treated unfairly, okay,
Mm,
this is still a far cry from leaving the company because they've had enough. But when they pull back, that lack of engagement and discretionary effort is a result and a reaction to what they're experiencing in the workplace. So it really is important and incumbent on organizations that want to capture that extra discretionary effort to take a look at what's really happening here. What things do we need to change? Are we managing conflict properly? Are we
mm,
communicating in a way that lets people feel heard and included? Um, you know, so there's a lot of leadership um, stuff that's out there that focuses on these little small pieces, and those are all valuable. But you really need to look at the big picture, because it's say, oh, recognition, we're going to hand out, you know, $10 Bojangle cards to everybody. It's like, oh yeah, that's great. But then somebody is being, really difficult in a meeting, where the rubber really kind of meets the road in terms of people's contributions, um, the respect that their contributions are being given or discounted. So it's those little things. It's really a lot about how people communicate. They think they're doing well, and everybody thinks they're being fair. Oh, of course I'm being fair. But in reality, how are they being perceived? You know, the self-awareness that people have of how they're connected. That's really the key to the relationship. Because if you have a good relationship, look, we all mess up sometimes. I
sure.
say, Jim, I'm sorry. That's not, I'm sorry that it was misunderstood. I'm sorry that you were offended. Now, if we have a good relationship, you're going to believe me and it's going to be, yeah, Hannah, okay, I get it. All right. I see how maybe I jumped the gun, or you blurted out something that you didn't mean, or didn't mean it that way. Move on. But if the relationship isn't strong enough, if you don't have that reservoir of goodwill built up, you start getting into that negative column, and everything starts to sound like, oh, that's a bias. Oh, they don't like women. They don't like this, whatever the thing is. And then every other piece of information gets fed that way, into that Pearl Harbor file. And then one day you go, boom, So anyhow.
Interesting. A Pearl Harbor file. I got to remember that one. What when you say that, I agree with you. You got to look at the big issues, but I think sometimes at the recruiter level, some issues can be avoided altogether because they um, are picked up on the recruiter side by the recruiter. What do you think are some things recruiters could be listening out for that would help them avoid a lot of these fairness issues on down the road?
Well, recruiters, as far as the company goes, it's really important that the company is crystal clear about the job requirements and not just the manual tasks, but sort of getting behind that to say what skill set and mindset is necessary for success.
Hmm.
so
Mm.
that recruiters can be screening for that, or at least trying to ask some oblique questions to kind of get behind what somebody's motivation is. Um, and similarly, for job candidates, for applicants, I think it's really important that they're honest with themselves about
Okay.
what's really important to them. Is it the free time that you were talking about?
Right.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's reasonable. For
Yeah.
some people, it's like, you only live once, and I need to have that, I need that space. Okay. Well, then you need to be asking questions and finding a job that gives you that flexibility and freedom. Is it a job that has more travel so that when you're en route somewhere, it feels like more fun, or where you can combine some work and play when you're at a destination? That maybe that's an answer. Is it remote work? Now, that could be abused. I know people talk about that. All right. But sometimes having the flexibility and not having the stress of a commute to a particular workplace can give you those extra 20 or 30 minutes a day that you can devote to something else. Go work out, go take a walk, whatever it is. That's flexibility. So being honest with yourself is one thing. Because, by the same token, if a big job with a big salary at a fancy firm, where the prestige is there, that's a trade-off. Okay. They're not going to be as concerned because they're going to push. I mean, that is one reason why they're as successful as they are. But recognize the trade-off. So being honest with yourself about what's most important. Is it the big salary? You may not have as much time as you want,
Mm.
you know?
My advice, where that's concerned, is marry wealthy. Uh, that solves a lot of the issues right
They
there.
create new ones too, Jim.
Which will create new ones, but it's all about trade-offs. All about trade-offs.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
when should someone consider? Okay, let's say someone feels they're being treated unfairly at work, and they're on one hand they're thinking, okay, I should try to fix this internally. On the other hand, I could say take this job and shove it. I don't know. What's the best signal for a worker to leave, and the best signal for someone to stay and try to fix the unfairness issue? What do you think?
Wow. Um, if somebody feels they're being treated unfairly, it's a spectrum and a continuum. There comes
Sure.
a point where the unfairness actually crosses a legal line and may be a behavior that's illegal. Um, I think number one, they should kind of keep track for themselves, um, the behaviors or the events that has hit them between the eyes. Okay. And I give it 3 months, because it could be a one-off thing. See if things have improved in 3 months. And that doesn't mean in the meantime, sit back and do nothing. If you have a fairly good relationship with your supervisor, or the person that has been causing this distress, I'd suggest talking to him about it, because if it's
Mm,
good, you can bring it back on track. That stuff happens all the time. And it's how you respond to it. Are you going to let it fester, or are you going to try and resolve it? And the question is how. So that would be the first thing. If after 3 months you feel that things haven't improved and you've got this list of stuff that's happened, then you need to ask yourself, do I want to stay or do I want to go? And sometimes exploring what the options are can make you realize, I want to stay. I need to stay. Mm. And so I think it depends on each person what their threshold is. Also, what level of job that they're at. Is it an entry level job? It may be easier to bounce around and take up something new. If you're mid-level or senior, well, those jobs are fewer and farther between as you go up the pyramid, right? I mean, we all know that. And so you might want to reconsider. You might want to reconsider. You might want to see if you can negotiate um, some type of better arrangement, I mean, if there's a lot of friction in an office setting, perhaps being able to work more remotely takes you away from that drama, and makes it easier to deal with. Uh, it- there's no one size fits all answer. I think it's all dependent, but keeping track of things kind of lets you measure in a way how much it's affecting you and maybe at different crossroads where you can try and take action either to address it directly or get somebody to help intervene on your behalf, whether that's human resources, if it's a peer that's causing problems, talking to your manager, um, you know, and if it's an illegal issue, talking to a lawyer.
Makes
Yeah.
sense. Makes sense. Um, okay, complete this sentence or this scenario.
Yeah.
An HR leader is walking through a bookstore. They see
Hmm.
the book Seeking Fairness at Work, and they open up the page. What's the one thing you want that HR leader to see? And they say, wow, this is the book for me. What do you want them to say?
I want them to see the testimonials that people have written about it that
Okay.
say this is for executives, managers, HR professionals, and employees who want a reality check. Am I going crazy? No, probably not. Are your expectations out of line? Well, here's a framework. You compare what you've been living through, and then you can see where you can tweak it. Um, but yeah, I like HR to recognize that this is something for them, and it's something for them to talk to their leadership about together, because HR can't solve it all. They can't. They can't. And leaders need to recognize that fairness isn't just something that's floating up here. They're dealing with the consequences of unfairness in very measurable ways that hits their bottom line.
Good answer.
Thank you, Steve. I feel so much better now.
Gold star for you. Gold star for Hannah today. If somebody want to get in contact with you to learn more about your book or about you personally or what have you, how can they find you online?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so I welcome connections on LinkedIn. The book is certainly available on Amazon. And you probably don't know this, but I'm going to reboot my podcast that is a companion piece to the book called Fairness
Ooh,
at Work. It's going to be on Substack in middle of September. So we'll take these conversations even further. Yeah.
very good. Very good. To make it easier for the listener and the viewer who's watching this on video, I will post links to it in the podcast description. So go right there, and all the pertinent information is there waiting for you. Hannah, I enjoyed this conversation so much. Oh my gosh, it's in my top 10 of podcast interviews.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You're a blast to talk to. Thank you.
Oh, shucks. All right. Thank you for being on the Jim Stroud podcast. Well, my time is up. I thank you for yours. I'll see you again real soon, right here, with a brand new episode of the Jim Stroud podcast. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. I can be reached by email at jimstroud@jimstroud.com. And one last favor, if I may ask, please rate this podcast. 5 stars is preferred, but please comment with your honest opinion. I really appreciate that. All right. Okay, until next time, bye-bye.